Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Software Plaza podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor of Software Plaza, and it's my pleasure to bring you each week a new conversation with a vendor, an open source project, or an end customer, someone who's building using tools in the cloud native computing space. And that's really what we cover. We cover everything that's happening in the field of cloud native computing, DevOps, Kubernetes, all that good stuff. And today I have with me Jonny Rivera, who's the Senior Director of Product at ActiveState. And they're a startup, a company that's really focused on securing open source. So something that's really growing each and every year. We see the importance of open source growing, and so securing all of that really is something that matters today. So I'm really excited to be talking to Jonny about all things open source security. With that said, let's get started. Jonny, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have.
All right, all right. Wanted to just get to know you a bit, Jonny. If you could just start us off with giving us a brief intro of your background and just your journey to active state so far.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in an IBM household, which stands for I've been
Okay.
moved, if you weren't aware of that. We
Oh,
moved
all
all up
right.
and down the East Coast and Texas, California, back in the heyday when, IBM kind of put you all over the place, right? So I grew up in a tech household. I didn't start my career in tech, but it kind of gradually called me back over time. So I've been in a couple
Mm,
different industries. Yeah, I've done healthcare tech, I've done complex 3D modeling, and then obviously cybersecurity in a couple of different stays, both here and at Malwarebytes. So gotten to do a lot of different things in the space. Obviously, it's evolved a ton over time. And that's part of the
mm,
cool thing is that you never will get bored. Something's going to
yeah,
happen every week that you got to kind of react to. So that's
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
little bit about the background there.
Right, right. And how did your product expertise happen? Was that something that is more recent, or was it from the start itself that you're always focused on product? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so again, it's technology was always a big part of my household, so I learned a lot of things through osmosis as I
Hmm.
was growing up. And I did start my time in tech on the product side a little bit more towards almost like enablement for our customers. So they would need specific things, and then I would kind of execute against them, and then growing more into the true product management by, either the certifications or courses and things like that. So pretty much the whole time my career has been focused on product. Yeah.
Hmm. All right, neat. So I wanted to talk about one of the key things that's going to be the center of our conversation today, which is open source. Talk to us about just the state of open source today, especially as it relates to security. What do you see happening? What have been some of the key trends and milestones over the past year or so? What's been on your mind when you think of open source security?
Yeah, so let me frame it from the position of active state and then move toward the market and then kind of what, my thoughts are moving forward. I'll kind of preface it that way. So one of the things that initially drew me to active state was kind of helping with eliminating that supply chain risk due to unmanaged open source, right? So a lot of enterprises
Mm,
rely on open source ingestion from the public internet, right? Allowing the potential for malicious packages and unmaintained dependencies to enter your environment most of the time undetected, right? And so what
mm,
ActiveState is focused on doing is providing that frictionless security at the source with a private curated open source catalog that's built for your organization, right? So it keeps the wild west of the open internet from happening. We rebuild things from source and it kind of keeps those issues from happening. And as part of that, we've made sure to have the largest open source library with over 70 million components across 12 language ecosystems. And we use the expertise that we've had from being in business for over 30 years to continually remediate those components. And we take the responsibility of securing those components for their engineers to be able to use in their CI/CD pipeline without there being friction. So the reason that all of that ties into where the state of everything is right now, it's kind of ungoverned is the wrong word, but everybody does it a different way, right? They'll get their
Mm,
stuff from Maven or PyPy or whatever the case is, and then they'll have an internal system that might be different, and things like that. So we kind of wanted to help bring light to that problem, standardize the process, and then take it one
yeah.
step further than a lot of people do, which is also care about the dependencies of those open source top level components. Because a lot of people will come to
Mhm.
us with like, hey, we need 100 top level components taken care of. And we're like, great, it's actually going to be, 250 because of the dependencies that you've got too, and we'll take care of those too. So there's just so much to have to like care about from the process to the top level components to taking care of those dependencies. I think those are kind of the big things that are on my mind as we kind of tackle the stuff that's going on in general. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot to unpack from that. I wanted to just focus a little on the term supply chain
Mhm.
and how that's been changing over the past couple of years. How has open source been becoming part of the supply chain more and more, and how has its role been changing in the recent times and from what you've seen?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of shift left. If you were talking about the chain, we got to start at the very beginning of the chain, right? And that's kind of the thing that we're focusing on from our side is making sure that whatever components go in are secure, and it makes the whole rest of the process easier. I can't tell you how many devs I've worked with where we're about to ship to prod and we find a CVE or whatever the case is, then we got to kick it back from QA back into the pipeline. So I think
Mm,
that that's the biggest thing for me is, if we're talking about supply chain security, it's starting at the beginning. So shifting left and making sure that
mm-hmm,
everything entering our ecosystem is safe and secure and we can trust it. It helps with a lot of other things too, like onboarding, for example, becomes much more easy. And I'm not just talking
mm-hmm,
about new employees, I'm talking about teams that maybe will shift over to a new project or whatever the case might be. If you've got everything in one place in that secure repo that's populated by secure components, a curated catalog, whatever the case might be, you can then build a process around that. So here's what your new team members do, here's what your transferred team members do, and it's all kind of the same thing. So you've shifted all the way to the left on that side, and the process becomes easier for everybody to document, to enforce, all that kind of stuff. So I think those are the trends that make the most sense to focus on for me in terms of the chain is get to the beginning of the chain and figure out what's going on there.
really interesting. Related to that, I wanted to ask, what would you say are some of the top misconceptions that people have when it comes to open source security? Like, what are some of the top ways that people may think they are secure, but they aren't actually secure? Maybe they think we only use official uh, container images or official repositories. We don't dabble around with stuff that we don't know too much about. Maybe they have that in their mind, so they think they're secure. Something like that. Do you have examples of things like that that you see out there in the wild that tell you people don't really understand the vulnerabilities they're dealing with open source security? What would you say are the top one, two, or three of those kind of misconceptions?
Yeah. It honestly is kind of what I was talking about before with kind of the Wild West of the open internet, where you may go to a Maven or a PyPy or whatever the case might be, and you think, well, this is fine to use and it's okay, right? So you may get the top level components from that, but again, the dependencies are something that are tied to that to even make it run. And so if you're procuring your stuff from
Mm-hmm.
multiple different places, there's just a greater chance of there being an issue, right? So we talk about attack surface a lot in the industry, right? The smaller your
Mm-hmm.
attack surface, the less that there's going to be an issue, right? So if you're procuring everything from one location, that standardizes where everything is going to be versus pull some from here, pull some from here. Oh, I didn't know I needed this
Mm-hmm.
dependency. Crap, it's Friday at
Yeah.
5 p.m. I got to pull that thing over here. And they're not vetted components. They're not rebuilt from source, right? So there could be a
Mm-hmm.
.exe in any of those, a bad binary, or whatever the case might be. And they might not even be aware of that being a thing because they just had to push something out, right? There's this real tension right now in the dev world of velocity versus security. And as they're pushed to do more velocity, the security part becomes a secondary thing. I think that they can work in
Mm-hmm.
tandem with each other, and it goes back to like making those processes cleaner and easier to use and replicate and things like that. but that
Hmm.
has to be the way that you approach it versus crap, it's Friday on a 5 p.m. and I forgot about this dependency. Let me pull it in. It may or may not be good. They'll catch it in post, right? Like that's the mentality that a lot of companies have. And it's not it's not inherently a bad thing. It's just because there's bad actors out there, right? I think there was a
Hmm.
report that Hunters just did that cybercrime is the number three economy in the world right now, right? So whether or not somebody has good
Wow.
intentions, there's a lot of other people with bad intentions, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Talk about bad news.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but I want to ask about this interesting thing you mentioned, the catalog, and
hmm
you spoke about like more than 70 million open source components as part of the active state catalog. Uh, Talk to us about those who probably, I mean, like what do organizations use? What do they do instead of a catalog? Like before, let's say they become your customers, what's the default catalog, or what do they use? Or do they just not use any sort of catalog? Do they just go kind of Wild West, just pulling from different places and, patching them together? What happens?
Yeah, so I want to use very specific nomenclature so that we don't confuse ourselves. So we have a
Yeah.
library that we pull and
Okay.
create curated catalogs from. So each catalog is
Oh.
custom curated for every single person that requests it, right? So our library is that 79 million components that we can pull from that have been vetted and things like that. And then we will custom build something for someone that's going to be very bespoke to their specific use case. So they maybe have it on Linux or Windows or Mac or whatever the case might be, and they need those components rebuilt from source for their specific application, right? So
Mhm.
essentially, we take that library and then that becomes a curated catalog for a customer to then interact with their repo of choice, whether it's JFrog's Artifactory, whether it's Sonatype Nexus, whatever the case might be. And then that becomes what the developers pull from. So your SecOps, your DevOps, they're going to know we as ActiveState exist or someone who does something similar. But their developers won't even know that there's a difference because they're pulling the components from their repo. It just happens that these ones are now secure and vetted and things like that. So the typical process, to your point, would be pull whatever they need to from the internet, place it in one of those repos, and then that's how their developers interact with those components. This is pushing it back earlier in the process to have a specific list of components along with their dependencies that their developers can pull from. They won't even know that ActiveState exists. They'll just know those are the ones that our DevOps and SecOps team have told us are the approved list, essentially. So there's different places along the, we'll call them user journey, right? So the developers don't know anything's happening and shouldn't. We don't want to interrupt their CI/CD pipeline. SecOps and DevOps are the ones who would implement that specific catalog of vetted components. And then those who are above, your CISOs, CTOs, whatever the case, would get reports on like, these are the ones we're using. We have less CVEs, whatever the case might be. So there's kind of a different place in the journey for each of those.
All right, got it, got it. So library to catalog. I wanted to ask about a recent release that I saw that you just had at Active State. You had released a bunch of new open source components, quite a big number, I believe. And one of the things I think that was mentioned as part of that release, or maybe on one of your LinkedIn posts, which I saw, was that you talk about going beyond scanners and image only hardening. I was wondering if you could tell us about this release. What are the kinds of how many new open source components? What kinds? What does it mean? And even talk to a bit about this point of beyond scanners and image only hardening.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to frame it. What I would say is there's three main distribution methods that we focus on: the curated catalog, the containers, and then managed distributions. And it really is whatever use case the company is going to have for that. In each of those distribution methods, we obviously will scan things for CVEs at the beginning, but what a lot of companies will do is be reactive. So what we're talking about is a very proactive stance. The scanner
Mm-hmm.
only and things like that are very reactive. Like we'll get whatever we need to get, we'll scan it, and then we'll fix it if it finds something, right? And so that process just slows down everything essentially. So if you focus on scanners only, you kind of make the process not be replicatable, right? The one thing that executives loves are, things that are consistent, right? Like there's not going to be a
Yeah.
big surprise. There's not going to be something that happens in the
Mm.
scanner's forward model, if you want to call it that. there's always the chance for, sorry, our deliverable is not going to make it because we found X number of CVEs and we got to go back and fix that. I use CVEs as the, flag, but there could be other things that are found, right? Missing dependencies, other things.
Okay.
So I
Mm-hmm.
would say that in the scanner model, you lose a lot of that consistency. You may find things and you may miss things, by the way. Scanners are not, perfect. So you leave a lot of that risk to the end of your process and then hope that you deliver on time.
Mm-hmm. Wow, wow. Interesting. Yeah, and I want to also talk about multi-language coverage, and if you could talk to that a bit, because I think I saw that there's the support for 12 plus languages that ActiveState has. You want to maybe talk a bit about that, just the languages you support?
Yeah, so a lot of companies will not just have one, right? Like they're not going to only code in Python or whatever the case is. In fact, the stat is that most companies use 5 to 7. I've had some companies laugh at me and say, "Man, I wish we could do 5 to 7," right? So the every company has a lot of different languages that they're using in their ecosystem, and
Yeah.
the secret extra language is going to be your shared dependencies, right? So your C, your C++, your C sharp, your generic libraries, things like that are kind of the underpinning between all those other languages. So you have the languages up at the top, right? You got your Python, Perl, Java, whatever the case might be. And then underneath
Mm-hmm.
those are the shared dependencies, right? So the ones that I just mentioned. And as
Mm-hmm.
you expand your languages in your system, you need to make sure that you're not getting just those top level ones, but the ones that are kind of supporting and underpinning the rest of them, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we make sure that we're covering as many of those as possible based on the Git pulls and things like that. So we've focused on the ones that we know are going to be most specific to developers' use cases. There, we'll always do one-offs for people who will ask, right? But we want to make sure that we hit the largest amount of use cases so that you in your real world job with 5 to 7 languages have not only those available, but all the, dependencies and things like that available too. So that's why it
Mm-hmm.
matters to have a good coverage. There's people who specialize in one or, maybe even 2 languages, but that doesn't help because then you have just a small subset of secure components and then the rest are still whatever the other process that you've got, right? So that's our goal is kind of deepening and broadening that so that you can do the day-to-day actual real work that you're going to be doing and not have to have, well, we do this process on Thursday, but this one's different on Friday, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. All right, all right. One theme or one function that I think would really love what ActiveState does is governance and compliance,
Hmm.
because it is, it comes with its own complexities and just big consequences if you get it wrong. Uh, but, kind of telling, governance and compliance, legal teams and all that, that this is the approach, and we're going to vet every open source tool that we use, all the dependencies included, and if you can actually do a good job, it's like peace of mind for them. Tell us what it means for governance, just this approach.
Yeah, a lot of people will conflate governance and compliance, which I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about compliance right now, by the way, but we can get to that maybe. I like
Mm-hmm.
to think of governance as kind of more of if we're looking at a car on a road, governance is like the steering wheel, like actually driving you the places you need to go, and compliance are the guardrails that keep you from falling
Okay.
off the road, right? So
Yeah.
governance helps you like decide who is, setting at the goal and the vibe, if you will, of the things that you've got, whereas compliance are the things that you have to do, right? So governance are kind of the rules and practices that your company creates that help you decide those different things. So, the triage model that you use or any of those kind of things, and then
Mm-hmm.
compliance are the government regulations or HIPAA, like all those kind of things that are like if we don't do this we will get fined or go out of business, that kind of thing. So I like to make a
Mm-hmm.
differentiation between those two. On the
Right.
compliance side, there's a lot of interesting stuff now. I think that this year is a big deal for
Mm-hmm.
compliance. Governments
Mm-hmm.
have been like, hey, we really would like you to do these things. And this year it's, no, you have to do these things. Or you're going to get slapped with big fines.
Mm.
So some
Could you give
examples.
us yeah, I was going to ask for an example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like the EU DORA and CSA2, like they're starting to look at those things. On the US specific side, the SEC is starting to crack down on board members and executives who are lax in their compliance, right? So it becomes not just the companies doing a fine, but specific individuals could potentially have an issue there, right? And I think
Uh,
that's a good thing because that allows companies to take responsibility and take ownership for the decisions that they make, whether it's,
yeah.
about AI regulations or whatever the case is.
Mm,
But it helps translate that and has a little bit more of a stick than a carrot mentality, which up to this point, there's been kind of the carrot, like, please do this and it'll be good, versus if you don't do this, it's going to be bad.
mm. Yeah, yeah. You mentioned AI regulation just now, and that got me thinking about just what influence AI workloads are having in all of this, the conversation we're having, right, about open source and security. How do you think the game is changing, considering a lot of enterprises are moving towards AI workloads? Uh, is it getting murkier in terms of like, you know, is security changing? Is it becoming more complex? What's happening because of, the rise in AI workloads?
It absolutely is becoming more complex. You're getting, you have to dig between what's real and what's hallucination. And you do that with your expertise in your field, right? I think that it's important for us to understand that we need to, so this goes back to guardrails. We need to give really good guardrails for the things that we ask AI to do.
Hmm.
So let me give a good example. So let's do testing as an example. So
Hmm.
if you have AI driven testing in your environment, agents are really good at exploit chaining, right? So they'll find the small vulnerabilities, but they lack the business context. So maybe it'll identify some SQL injection, and while they're trying to verify it, it'll blast all of your customer base to verify that that email is not happening, right? So there's things that it will do if you don't stop it from doing, right? And so
Okay.
it also provides a lot of noise, right? So there's a lot of things that it'll say. The business context piece is what's missing a lot of the time. So you'll find a ton of
Hmm.
things. Some may be false positives, some may be good, but you have to sift through all of that to determine what is relevant, right? A thing that is important going back to the supply chain is that whatever code is being generated and whatever dependencies it's finding or whatever the case might be, you want it to be pulling from a secure repository. So if you are pointing it to something that you know is good, then you know that the output and the recommendations that it's going to have are also going to be good versus the open internet. I always like to make the joke, when Google was doing the first AI prompts at the beginning, it's like, can you put glue on pizza? And it would read a Reddit article where it was like, yep, it's good to put glue on pizza. No worries, right? It's because it had less
Hmm.
guardrails and it was still, maturing and things like that. So I think that putting those guardrails in place and making sure that you direct it to secure things, that's number one, because otherwise you're going to be spitting out a ton of code that's insecure, and then you got to go back and fix those things. And then on the testing
Hmm.
side, making sure you have good testing in place so that it can't do things like email blast your entire, CC list.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Neat. So we spoke a lot about the obvious benefits of something like this, like having a vetted catalog that you use. And so while those obvious benefits are there for security, for governance, compliance, are there other not so obvious benefits that you've noticed that when organizations adopt this approach of having a really good a vetted catalog of open source tools that they use only from that? What are some of the other not so obvious benefits?
To using a catalog in general,
Yeah,
or
catalog and just the approach that ActiveState recommends, which is, having a vetted catalog and a library that's, approved and pulling just from that.
yeah, no, that makes sense. So I would say that some that are not obvious, I mentioned onboarding. That's really a big deal. Team changes are a big thing. You'll focus on one thing in one quarter and then maybe another, and you kind of will reallocate. Some people do like squad-based teams and things like that. So whatever
Hmm.
team they're moving to or project they're moving to, it's really important to make sure you have standardized processes in place so that they can
Hmm.
accelerate quickly, right? One of the biggest
Hmm.
things of onboarding a new employee is like, well, this is how we do things. These are the ways that we do it, that kind of thing. Being able
Hmm.
to always point to the same thing, have the same processes, I think that's huge. In terms of
Hmm.
the other benefits, it's making sure that problems don't come up late in the process. When you're doing your QA process, we talked about this before, you don't want to be catching CVEs. You want to catch, oh, hey, this thing is teal, it should be blue, right? Like those are the things you want to catch at the end of the QA process when you're about to, do something. And so by having that additional work at the beginning of setting all that up, you know that the rest of your pipeline is going to be a bit more, smooth sailing. And then the things that you're
Mm,
catching, before it goes to production are hopefully things that are either a code issue or color issue or, something that's not like, oh man, we got to redo this for CVEs or it's the wrong version or, whatever the case might be. Um,
mm,
those are two there. In terms of any others that may not be obvious. Um, the thing that is definitely not obvious is that open source in and of itself is not insecure. It's getting out of date. And so when you have someone else taking care of that mental load, you don't have to worry
mhm,
about those things. So the way that ours works is we deliver a security feed that will say, here's the changes that you need to implement in your system. We obviously can't implement it in their system. They have their own ecosystem and things like that. But that mental load of keeping up with all of the updates of open source, whether it's CVE prevention or new versions, whatever the case might be, I think that's the biggest one to take away is we can help take that off of their plate and they can focus on, the features and innovations that they want to do versus we'll call this grunt work of keeping OSS up to date and making sure that there's not CVEs and things like that. So if I was going to pick a
mm,
main one, that would be the big one. The first time you deploy it probably is going to be fine, and then it gets out of date over time. And keeping up with that is a huge mental load off.
Wow, some really interesting points there. Another thing that I want to touch on is just the concept of drift. Because you could start off with something and then it goes to production, someone updates it, it ends up being something else. So does ActiveState help with detecting and resolving drift as it happens, or does ActiveState just own the initial part of just the image or the repository that you get at the start, but after that you need other tools to secure these same images and the stuff what's in production? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'll answer it two ways. I mentioned the three distribution methods. One's the catalog, one is containers and distro. Containers and distro are fully packaged, right? So as updates happen to those, we'll give you the newest version completely done in that contained package. So whether it's a distro or container. So we'll keep up with that over time. If there's new CVEs that are discovered, version changes, whatever the case, you get those new pieces and objects, no problem. On the curated
Hmm.
catalog side, it's slightly different because they're components, right? It goes back to the security feed that I was mentioning. We will provide the updates for those specific components. So if a CVE is discovered, a new version needs to be done, whatever the case is, in that feed, we'll say, hey, here's the things that you need to address inside your ecosystem. Go ahead and take care of that. So again, we can't put that in their ecosystem, but we take that load off of, hey, these are getting out of date. Here's the one you have to do. You don't have to go look for it. You don't have to find anything. Put those in and you're ready to go. So drift is definitely a thing, and that's what makes open source insecure. It's not inherently insecure, it's that it gets out of date, right? And so if you can
Hmm.
have somebody else worrying about that, you're doing good.
All right, all right. Cool. Yeah, we're winding down our conversation. Last couple of questions that I have for
Yeah.
you are just about where you see the industry headed in the next year or two, what's happening and what excites you most.
Yeah, so I see let's do two ones and two real ones and a fun one.
Okay.
I see agentic AI fighting with
Mm,
itself on both sides. And what I mean by that
okay.
is we talked about the third largest economy in the world being, cybercrime. They will
Mm.
get an arms
Oh,
race with those who are preventing that arms race. And so you'll get
mm,
literally a fight back and forth on both sides of I want to get in, no, you're not allowed to get in. And there's got to be some kind of tipping
yeah.
point on either side. It's whichever side keeps up with it. So I see
Mm,
that being an issue there. Who
mm,
wins that
mm.
arms race, right? We talked about it
Wow.
briefly before. Regulations changing from governments, from the slap on the wrist to you are getting fined. Also, we are taking out specific people and making them accountable for it. So it really is just a shift of taking accountability for the things that you are in charge of, you being the company, being a good steward of the private data that you have, and things like that. Privacy is anti-AI if we're thinking about it, right? Because it needs
Mm,
data to be able to pull and things like that.
yeah.
So there's going to be a tension between companies of privacy versus velocity and throughput, what we allow them to do, and things like that. So you'll see companies stand out who are good at keeping people's data private, whether it's HIPAA, sensitive government data, whatever the case might be, versus the output that they're still able to do, and those who will sell their soul to crawl through as much
Mm.
data, right? So I think you'll see that in the next year more than anything else because of those regulations. And then the fun one that I think I see happening is deepfake as a service. So you've seen a lot of those videos of, Tom Cruise
Yeah.
doing something that's clearly fake, right? But a lot of people can't tell the difference of that. And so the harm can be done on someone's personality or reputation by those
Mm.
things. You could do it as, a CEO of a company doing something, right? Like the thing going around the internet right now is McDonald's CEO who, when he ate the burger, he called it a product and it just didn't seem real. And then all the other companies did burger eating videos, that kind of thing. You can do
Mm.
a simple video like that, it be completely fake, it be found to be completely fake, and the damage already be done, right? So I think that's potentially one that could happen this year as well. That's the fun one.
Wow,
Not
some
so
really
fun one.
interesting stuff there. Yeah, wow, I think we could spend a whole lot of time just discussing those things. But if I were to just ask you one follow-up question,
Yeah.
I really found it interesting that you mentioned agentic AI and just, being used on both sides of the spectrum for good and for bad.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of hints that we have when we look back at the past of how, let's say, open source developed or the internet itself or the dark web? Any hints we could take from history, computing history, to kind of look forward and say that this is how it'll kind of play out? Anything that comes to your mind on those lines?
That's tough because we're looking in the crystal ball at this point. So I'll answer it with the preface of this is crystal bally and not fact. So if we can
Sure,
talk
sure.
about it that way, then that's
Yeah.
fine. Um, as you've talked about the dark web and other things that have, come up over time, there will always be a way that people find to get around the systems that exist. And so
Mhm.
for those of us who are preventing that stuff, we need to be good about anticipating what the next thing might be. So, we can talk about quantum computing, we can talk about all of those other things. If we're talking about an arms race, so we'll go back to that specific agentic AI as an example, how do we prevent the other side from being able to scale? Because they may be able to do things at a small scale, but the scale becomes how many graphics cards do you have access to? How much power do you have access to? Like you can get above that at a meta level to the things that impact the thing that we're talking about, right? And so you almost have to think about it that way, being able to cut it out from the source versus battling the very specific object. Like if they're able to do that for one company, it's not as big a deal, but if they're able to do it to 50 companies at a time, that becomes like an economic shuttering type situation, right? So I think that that potentially becomes the way that we look at it. It's not how do we combat the very specific AI bot. It's how do we prevent it from scaling? How do we keep it from growing? All that kind of stuff. So I think that would be where I would, if I was in my crystal ball looking, like how do we combat those things, cutting it off at the source?
Mhm. All right. Yeah. Wow. Really interesting stuff. Last question I want to ask is about just active state and the roadmap ahead. What's coming up? What could you tell us, kind of, to look forward to that, this is on the roadmap? What excites you about what's on the roadmap? Tell us a bit about what's coming up in the next year or so.
Yeah, no. So for me personally, I'm very excited that we're kind of deepening and broadening that catalog. So we talk about the specific languages. Being able to service a
Mhm.
bunch of them is top of mind for me. So there's three main pillars for each language to be deliverable to people. It's ingesting that from whatever repository, building it from source, and then delivering it in its native format. So, if it's R, it's a CRAN style repository, things like that. So setting up that framework for each of the languages that we're looking at. Really interesting, and that way it doesn't impact people's CI/CD pipelines, things like that. Working on the underlying supporting components so that with people who have 5 to 7, we're able to kind of give them, we'll call it a component kit of things that they'll be able to use for whatever languages they expand into. So almost preventing that in the future from being an issue. And then the other is kind of like the security feed. We talked about it a little bit. It's in its infancy right now, but I see it having a lot of new features over time. Those ones could be things like we don't only give you the components that you're looking for, but we actually will help you with your internal AI to execute against those, and then you can review the changes that were made and then approve or deny based on what is looked at. So being able to take not only the information that we're giving you, this component's out of date, it has a CVE, here's the new thing, but then executing it in your environment. Those are the things that are on my mind to add past when we do the depth and breadth of the languages to kind of help not only get them into a good place, but keep them in a good place, right? So again, OSS is not inherently insecure. It's when they get out of date and things like that. So not only providing them the initial stuff that they need, but being able to keep up with it over time and keep that mental load off of people. The biggest thing for me is that in tech, we lose the person on the other side of the screen a lot of the time. And I want to make sure that the things that we're doing positively impact the users on a day-to-day basis. They can go on Friday to their daughter's game or their, son's whatever, and not have to worry about the CVE dashboard that's lighting up like a Christmas tree, right? So that's really important for me is to be able to help them do those things and be able to live a good life, right? So those are the things that are in my mind right now.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, those things make a difference. Wow, that was quite an interesting conversation, and we touched on a lot of different things. We definitely centered on open source and security, but we did touch on a bunch of stuff apart from that as well. Thanks so much for joining us, Johnny. It was really a great conversation today.
Oh, I appreciate you having me and happy to talk anytime that you'd like.
Right. And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about ActiveState, head over to their website, activestate.com, and check out what they're up to. Get in touch with Johnny on LinkedIn if you'd like to continue the conversation with him. And if you'd like to keep track of our conversations on this podcast, head over to softwareplaza.com or find us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We've been doing this now, I think, about 3 years. So we've got like a load of episodes that we've been doing that are up there. And tune in for the next one. We'll see you on that one.